Is this working? Okay, cool. Hello to whoever views this. First of all, I apologize for the low quality. I'm not like a very technically savvy person, so this is the best I could do on my MacBook. But my name's Trevor. I'm a student in leadership development, and here is my video reacting to my leadership interview that I had earlier last week with Jill Pettibone, who is the Assistant Director of Student and Young Alumni Affairs and also the advisor to the Florida Cicerones. So I'm going to run through these questions and just kind of talk a little bit about what I learned and the things that she kind of taught me and that I learned just observing her in the interview. So the first question is an explanation of why this individual was selected. So I chose Jill because of just observing her her interesting approach to leadership through the years. So she's an advisor to the Florida Cicerones, which is I don't want to say notorious. That's not the right word, but is famous on campus for being a very outgoing and committed group of leaders on campus. So I was curious as to how does somebody lead a group of leaders. That was the whole kind of theme that I thought about when I was choosing who to interview, and I thought about Jill, and I just think that what she does for the Cicerones is fascinating. Just because being effective in that space, being an effective leader to a group of leaders just seems something different because it's not what we usually talk about in class. In class, we have there's a group of followers and then a leader. But what happens when there are leaders who require somebody, to lead them in certain circumstances? So that's why I chose Jill. Another reason why I chose her is talking to certain Cicerones. It's very evident the kind of impact that she has on them. She's a very beloved figure in Cicerones. So I was curious as to why that was, and what does she do differently than other advisors in the past that make her this kind of revered figure in the organization. So I went to her office last week and sat down with her for about 20 minutes to do this interview. There was a couple of things that I picked up very early on in the interview. When I walked in, she was talking to another Cicerone who was just wrapping up kind of meeting with her. And it wasn't a very official meeting. They were just kind of talking. It was obvious that they had been talking for a while. I go in and pardon myself and just kind of explain, why I'm there. And, they leave. And it was obvious that the student was very friendly with her. And it was obvious right off the bat the kind of friendly rapport that she has with a bunch of Cicerones. During the interview, it was very obvious that she displayed many of the classic traits that a leader is. She's very kind, not only evident in my interview, but how she interacted with the student before me, but also very attentive to me and very empathetic towards me. The funniest thing that happened in the interview was she asked about myself 20 minutes before I started the interview. So that she talked to me about like what was going on in my life for 20 minutes. Then we did the interview, and then we talked about me and what was going on in my life for another 20 minutes. And I thought that was fascinating. Like it was never about her, even though I showed up to interview her, which is very humble. I think it's a skill that I think is hard to find a lot in today's leaders. The ability to just kind of sit back and let whoever is coming to you be the focus. And that's kind of what I've found in this class to be kind of an overarching theme, that it's never about the leader. It's always almost exclusively about the follower, at least when it comes to effective leadership. So that was very evident during the interview. It was always, even when I was asking her questions, it was always kind of centered around myself and what I was learning in the interview, and that was very interesting. So going into the key characteristics of leadership that we talked about during the interview, there were two that I found that were very evident. So I was talking to Jill, and she comes from a very small town in Ohio, very rural, kind of backcountry area. And then she went to Ohio State as undergrad, and then came down here to kind of pursue a career in education. And then I asked her why, what drove her to kind of leave Ohio and leave that kind of small town mentality. And she was very honest about the idea of just kind of pursuing a very diverse group of people to kind of express ideas and to express different beliefs. So the idea of diversity came up in the interview very quickly, and it became very obvious that that's something that's very important to her. And I thought that was interesting, especially in the context of Cicerones. You know, Cicerones is again famous for being a very diverse group of people, and it was obvious that that was important to her. And for her to find Cicerones was pretty interesting, I thought. Um, this was also an interesting concept, kind of coming from somebody who has had the opportunity to be a leader in different situations, and diversity has also come up there. It's obviously becoming a very important part of leadership today, and I thought that the way that she handled diversity, or the way that she used diversity to kind of motivate her to become a leader, was interesting. She wanted to make sure that she surrounded herself with a very diverse group of people, people who thought differently, came from different backgrounds, and that kind of motivated her to come down to Florida and join the Cicerones. And that was fascinating to me. We also talked a little bit about the team aspect of Cicerones and how she decides to lead. And as soon as we started talking about that, I immediately thought about the style behavior approach to leadership that we talked about earlier on in the class, with the kind of 5 areas of leadership, and the 9-9 being the team approach to leadership. So 9 with effectiveness, and 9 with kind of interpersonal relationships. So I started asking her about how important it was for her to be relatable to the people she works with, especially with young college students. And it was obvious that it was very important to her. She mentioned how she wanted to, when she interacts with leaders and Cicerones, and this is coming from how she behaved with other Cicerones that I observed her with in the past and before the interview. She obviously wants to be very friendly, and I think that she relies on that friendliness to be able to establish that trust. That was another big theme in the interview: trust between leaders and followers. To establish that trust for the people that she worked with to come up with the ideas that help Cicerones almost by themselves. So she kind of acts as a guide for the people that follow her and the people that work for her. She just kind of she mentions the direction that she thinks that the organization rather should go in, and she hopes that the student kind of finds their way, and they agree on where the organization should go. And then obviously she's very goal driven. She wants to make sure that the Cicerones are operating to the best of their ability. So kind of seeing those two in tandem working together, I came up, it seemed to me that it was very style behavior approach with that team kind of association that we talked about in that part of class. After the interview, it was so strange. I walked out of it and I mentioned how much she asked about me, and I felt very nurtured when I left, which was something that I don't feel a lot when I interact with people on a day-to-day basis in college, especially people in leadership positions. It was a very refreshing feeling. Even though I was the one doing the interview, I felt like I was the subject of it, and she had this uncanny ability to relate to me on a personal level. And that made me want to do a great interview with her, and it made me want to work for her, and not for the benefit of myself, but the benefit for the organization. And I know that by doing that, I would establish a better relationship with her, which is kind of the goal. So she kind of uses the idea of interpersonal relationships, maybe subconsciously or not, as a goal for success, which I thought was very cool. So finally, the key statements that Jill made in her interview that kind of aided me in understanding how she leads on a practical level. She said multiple times that it was her ability to become friendly with Cicerones and establish that trust with the Florida Cicerones, who again are a very bombastic group of people who are very passionate about what they do, and that allows them to be comfortable with the decisions that she makes. She mentions that when Cicerones have meetings, she rarely gets up and talks. She's just in the back making sure everything goes well. But when she does stand up and talk, people listen, and that's because of the relationships that she's built. So at the end of the day, it was a very personal leadership style that I thought was very effective, especially in that kind of setting. And it made me understand what kind of impact interpersonal leadership and interpersonal leadership style can have on the effectiveness of a group. So that's just something that I want to take forward. Being able to establish those bonds will be something that I want to do in future leadership positions. So that's pretty much it. I thoroughly enjoyed interviewing Jill Pettibone, and I wish to meet leaders like her in the future. Hope you enjoy. Thank you.